So this is my group's presentation on our comparison of contemporary noir and film noir. So our contemporary, which we are doing, is going to be Blade Runner from 1982, and our film noir is going to be Laura from 1944. The difference is that contemporary is more modern and film noir is it's classic. One of the things which I have to talk about is the storyline, plots and themes of films. So basically I'm just going to tell you what it is and then how is it used in my two films and just all of that. So what is a plot? The storyline of a movie is the way the story develops, which can also be known as the plot. That's why I've decided to say what is storyline / plot, since they are very similar and most people just put them in the same area. It is tended to be used in films because if you didn't have them in the film, then it would just be all over the place and you wouldn't be able to understand where the film is going. So two examples which we used was, of course, Blade Runner and Laura. So Blade Runner was created in 1982 and Laura was created in 1944. So they were very different, but they're both film noirs. Now, in Laura, a detective is investigating the death of a girl called Laura. That is the basic plot and storyline for everyone to follow so they understand what's actually going on. Now, Blade Runner, the main character, was told by a police boss to continue his old job as a hunter, which is him tracking down, which is very similar to what a detective does, where they have to find information and track something down. So he was tracking a human in Blade Runner, or humans, and then in Laura, the detective was trying to figure out who had killed Laura, but later on in the story, the plot and storyline has changed, so that's how it's gone. So now we're going to move on to what is theme. The theme of the film sets the movie in motion and allows the audience to grasp what the movie is going to be about. So, for example, it could be about greed, love, betrayal, jealousy, revenge, money, corruption, murder, all sorts of that. So with Laura, it's about a murder and investigating crime, and it's very similar to Blade Runner, where he's having to catch some convicts, so i.e. criminals. So these two films are very similar. They're both noirs, and most noirs follow the same basis of crime, money, sex, murder, everything like that, which is done because everyone who watches film noir is a set audience and it is made for film noir people who like watching film noir. So if they changed it up, it just wouldn't feel right to people who watch it on a daily basis or every now and then and enjoy film noir. My next subject is editing. This subject can vary and have a lot more added on to it, but I'm just going to show you the basics. So what is editing? Editing is the final cut, which happens during a film, and it's the very final thing, but it will go through extensive different ways of going through. So you'll have an edit, then it will go to a colour grader, then a sound effects artist, and a VFX artist, and all of that, which goes back and forth multiple places to create better looking clips, basically. So, and that helps develop the story, because if your edit is bad, your story isn't told. Most people think the storyline and the plot and theme is what makes the film so good, but if you have a shocking edit and an amazing storyline, it doesn't matter. So some editing techniques used would be fades, L cuts, J cuts, just normal cuts, and then even just music being synced up in like fight scenes. So here's an explanation of them all. The fade. This is where the video clip will slowly but surely fade into dark to make a smooth transition into the next scene. So this will make it just feel more normal and not from one scene to another and just sort of make the audience lose focus. This gradually helps them get into the next scene. Now moving on, an L cut. This is where the audio of the last scene carries on to the next scene even when the new scene's video starts playing. It just helps the audio of a scene carry on. So if music was playing from the last scene, it will go into the next scene just to help you slowly move on to the next scene and just be a better transition. The J cut. This is the same as the L cut, but it's the overlapping of the new video with the overlapping of the old audio. So it's basically the L cut, just the opposite way around. Now the cut, this is a technique used in every film. The three above, they are most normally used, but sometimes maybe not, but cuts are always used. This is where the clips change to the next scene or to a different point of view straight away with nothing in it, and it just flips over and will be used in any film. You look at any film, they will have it. Finally, music synced up. This allows editing to be more fluent, or not editing, the actual video more fluent and just feels more right, but it's used to sync up the audio to the clip with the music, and it just makes the audience feel more a part of the scene and everything like that. Editing. All of these editing techniques are all used in Noir and in Blade Runner. Even though they are both film noirs, these editing techniques are used in most films. This is because these techniques make the edit smoother and makes the film easier to understand and watch. The fade. Fade was used in Blade Runner and in Noir to help a transition of time pass, since it is a smooth and simple way to show that either a lot or even a little time has passed. L-cuts. The L-cut is also used in both, since it helps for when two or more people are talking. Just makes the conversation feel more natural. It's like if you had two people in front of you facing each other. When one's talking, you'll be looking at them, but then the other one starts talking and you have to tilt your head. That tilting of your head is audio coming from the other side without you realising, and you have to make an adjustment to see. J-cut. The J-cut is like the L-cut and does the same thing. It helps for when two or more people are talking, since it makes the conversation feel more natural. It's like if you were looking back and forth and they talk before you move to look. Cuts. Cuts are used in both, since it helps the transition for when the detective in Laura is talking to other people and we need to see their reaction. Just like Blade Runner, it does the same. So they will both cut to make a transition and just skip to a whole new scene so we can talk to other people and everything like that. And finally, with music being synced up, this is used in both, since the music helps you feel a part of the scene and it helps us as an audience get into the film, so it's like you are there in front of them while they are playing it out to you. So it would happen with the detective in Laura, and it happened with Blade Runner, and it just made you focus more on the scene and feel more a part of it. My final thing which I need to talk about is the camera. So when we talk about camera in films, we don't really talk about the actual camera, more the angles and the pans used in the film, since if these aren't good, it makes the whole film feel choppy and just not as smooth. So if you had all your shots filmed on a tripod, it just wouldn't feel right, because it's not in motion and it just doesn't feel correct for everyone. Some examples of camera techniques which could be used and are commonly used in film noir are low angle shots, high angle shots, medium shots, close up, focus pull, Dutch angle, mirror reflection, and a pan. So what are all these? A low angle shot. This is a shot used to show the person in front of the shot is in power or is dominant. So say if a character was lying on the ground and the camera was pointed up at the person standing over them, it's a point of view of the person lying on the ground, how they are to the person standing up, and it just shows off the people in front standing up are more dominant and in power over the person on the floor. The high angle shot, this is a shot which can be used to get an overview of the whole place, but can also be helped to show the dominance. So if one character is a lot bigger than their other character who they're facing off against, they will use a high angle shot facing down over the smaller character to show he isn't as powerful, but it can also be used to make us all underestimate the people who are lower down. The medium angle shot, this is a shot which can help get two subjects in a shot at once and is normally used when they are having a conversation, so it lets you see both of them in frame at the same time, and it will just help you understand a bit more than everyone chopping back and forth, because it gets a bit messy and people struggle to understand. So you'll see every now and then a medium angle shot is used. The close-up now, this is a shot used to show emotion in a character's face, so we can see their reaction to a comment or thing they have just seen / heard. So if we, let's say, had a family and then a police officer came around and told them one of their family members died in a shooting or died in a car crash, this is where the director would decide to take advantage of this and get a close-up of a family member's reaction, to see how they react to it, to help the audience understand what they're going through, or even to understand what their character's like. So if the character shows no care, it makes us feel annoyed and angry at that character. But it can also make us feel sorry for them if they are upset. Now moving on to the focus pull. A focus pull is used to change the focus on a different object or person. This will be just another way of introducing a character or anything like that, or showing something else which now needs to be important. The Dutch angle, this is normally used to show the madness of part of a scene, so shows problems which are going on and just makes you feel more a part of the scene and showing that it's a bit all over the place. The mirror reflection shot, this shot is normally used to help the development of a character in a scene, so you will tend to have a shot of through the mirror of them getting ready, and that's just giving you the option to see how they get ready and what they may be going through, and it tends to be used to show that, hey, a character is now going to change differently. And finally, the pan shot. The pan is also used to help move around a scene, so it just stops the scene from feeling very still. So like I said earlier, if you left all your shots on a tripod, it just wouldn't feel right because there's no movement, whereas the pan shot allows movement in the scene and just makes the scene feel more like you can be a part of it. So camera. Examples of films where these techniques are used is, of course, Noir and Blade Runner, the two films which we had to do. The shots which are used in Noir is low angle shot, high angle shot, medium angle shot, close up, mirror reflection, and pan. As you can see though, there was no focus pull, so we won't be talking about that for Laura. And then for Blade Runner, it's a low angle shot, high angle shot, medium angle shot, close up shot, and a pan. This is just because I never saw any reflection shots nor focus pulls, so we won't be talking about focus pull at all, but reflection shot will be used. Remember, these were only just some of the examples which we could have used. There were many more which we could have used. With the low angle shot, they are both used in both of these films, and it helps show the person ahead of the shot is dominant. So like I said earlier, if it's very low, the person in front of it, which is looking up at it, just helps you show that they were the dominant ones. And it was used very often in it was used quite a bit in Laura to help us understand who was in power while the detective was going round and how everyone else thought. With a high angle shot, this allowed them both, in both films, to use it to do the same thing as the low angle shot, but of course the other perspective, which helped us also see in Laura and Blade Runner who of course was dominant and who wasn't. Medium angle shot. This shot is used in both films to help us as an audience understand who is talking to who when there is one or more characters. This was used in Laura in the very opening scene to show the detective coming in and introducing himself as the detective and him being the main character, but then also to introduce a brand new character who he needed to talk to and find information from. And then it was also used in Blade Runner on one of his opening scenes of where we see the Blade Runner of him sitting down and then behind him two police officers coming up to come get him, which just helped us understand who was dominant and what was going on. So they were both used in both shots. Now the mirror reflection shot, this shot is only used in Noir from what I remember, and this helped us understand the development of who the detective thought was guilty, because one of the very first mirror shots used was where the detective is in the background talking to another character, and the detective is sort of sitting there with a little game which he has and not really listening to what the other character looking through the mirror had to say, because this helped to show the development of the detective in him realising, well, this person isn't guilty, we're okay. And then finally, the pan shot. This shot is used in both films and helps the films feel less choppy, like I said before, and it made it easy for us as an audience to understand where they were and what was going on, because, like I said, tripod shots just on tripods and no movement, it just doesn't feel correct, because it just doesn't help you get part of the scene. Because if two people were talking, you wouldn't just be standing there forever and watching them, or if people were walking, you wouldn't be standing there watching them walk, you would walk with them. So it just made it feel a lot more. So now we are going to go over to George's characters.
So, comparing the types of characters in the two film noirs, starting with Laura, due to Laura being an old film noir, like from the 40s, old film noirs back then had like the stereotypical characters like damsel in distress, a detective who's really involved in his case, the husband who has many mistresses, like the rich man who takes advantage of women. Like, they were all the popular stereotypical characters the audience of that time would have known of, and these types of characters are in Laura, so the audience watching Laura would have been intrigued and would have enjoyed these typical characters being there, because back in the 40s people didn't really like change, and they just wanted to follow the normal routine, and the characters in Laura are the normal routine. So the audience back then that's why those characters suited the type of audience back then. However, in Blade Runner, due to the fact that it was 40 years later, in the 1980s, the world had become more modern, so the types of characters in the movies had changed and become more accepted and adapted to the world around them. For example, in the Blade Runner, one of the main characters is Rachel, who is a strong, powerful woman, unlike Laura, who was more of a beautiful and like pretty woman that like was respected due to her looks. But Rachel in the Blade Runner was powerful and an empowering woman. As a main character would have just been like appearing in the 80s. Like it would have like been in a few movies, but not many. So the audience would have been like interested in how the movie would pan out with an empowering woman as the main character, because Rachel is part of a gang thing in Blade Runner, so that wouldn't have really been around. So that would have been interesting to see a woman as quite a big lead in a gang. And obviously, however, in the 1940s, where Laura was set, an empowering woman in a gang wouldn't really be around, so it would have shocked the audience, especially the male audience. And that's what makes these two movie characters differ. And it shows how throughout time the characters of women in film noir have developed and become more accepted and appreciated. So now comparing the costumes of the two movies, again starting with Laura. So as you can see, they're the types of costumes that were used in the film noir Laura, and then those costumes were very, very, very similar to the 1940s fashion, as we can see on the right of the screen. So this is kind of what the upper class people in the 40s would have worn. So it made the whole film noir a lot more naturalistic for the audience, and using these realistic costumes would have been more interesting for the audience, because it shows everybody looking normal and dressing normally for the 1940s, yet something horrible occurred still. So it would have made the audience like intrigued of how it happened in such a normal looking place where the audience looked the same as them, if you know what I mean. And also the fact that the costumes are basically replicas of the 1940s fashion would have made the film noir more convincing for the audience, as if like they're there and like it's there in their time period with them, which it was basically. And that is probably why it was such a popular movie. But in Blade Runner, obviously the costumes are a lot different than in Laura, but although Blade Runner was released in 1982, the costume and fashion within the film noir don't match what was considered normal 80s fashion, because the movie was set in the future, so the costumes are more futuristic, and this would have intrigued the audience at the time, because they would have been interested in like what the future looked like, people in the future looked like, and what they were wearing, because audiences were very naive in the 80s and earlier years, so they would have believed that that's how everyone would have been dressing and looking like. So it would have made them possibly like thinking that was what the future would hold for them, like fashion wise, would have sent out all kinds of emotions for different people during the audience. So it would have made them excited about the change and the change in the era. And that's what differs the two movies. The fact that in Laura, the costumes are the exact same as the fashion sense, so people would have felt like they're living within the movie. But in Blade Runner, the costumes are further in the future than their current 80s fashion sense, so it would have made people excited maybe for like what the future holds for fashion. Then comparing lighting in the two movies, again starting with Laura, the lighting in Laura was basically all very soft and naturalistic, and this was mainly because the 1940s is where film noir really like started and kicked off, so everyone in the film industry, directors, producers, etc., would have lacked good skill and knowledge of lighting, so they wouldn't have like branched out with the lighting and would have just done it as simple as they could really, because they weren't all that smart with the whole lighting situation. So they would have just stuck to basic lightings for a shot. But the lighting in Laura wouldn't have affected the audience majorly because no one really knew what to do. So the audience wouldn't really have been picking at the lighting, as everyone was pretty much clueless about lighting, especially the audience. But the lighting in Laura is very naturalistic. And this would have been good for the audience. This would have been nice for them because it would have made them feel more involved in the whole film noir, because the lighting wouldn't have been much different to how the audience's houses would have been lit. So they again would have felt more involved with the whole movie. However, in Blade Runner, lighting was very, very different compared to Laura, because by then the film industry would have developed their lighting skills like massively. So they would have like learned how to properly light a shot to create effect and mood. So in the Blade Runner, the lighting was a lot more dark and dingy, and this would have told the audience that the whole theme of the movie was serious and tense and scary. And in the 80s, the audience would have been very interested in this, because they would have been convinced that that kind of lighting is what the future would hold for them. So they would have thought that the dark and dingy lighting is the directors like telling them that the future is just going to be a lot more depressing and different. And this would have really hung with the audience in the 80s, as they would have been convinced by this movie. Two film noirs have very, very different types of lighting, which shows us as an audience how much lighting and the film industry how they changed in just 40 years. The two film noirs have completely different lightings. Like Blade Runner, they have different angles, different harshness and colours. However, in Laura, it's just black and white with lack of difference and lacks types and variety of lighting. It's either just harsh and bright or dim and soft.
Blade Runner is set in a dystopian Los Angeles of 2019. It is set in a much more natural and busy place with loads more people compared to Laura. The location would have been much easier to film as they had access to a studio and green screens, so most of the movie would be shot in indoor locations and would not disturb the public. In most modern film noirs, they are set in dystopian futures, overrun by corrupt groups such as the police or the government. Movies back then were mainly shot in dark areas, and mostly outdoor shots were based at night. There are very few characters in classic film noir movies, which makes the locations feel very empty and secluded. In old film noirs, like Laura, indoors was the most common settings for the movies. Blade Runner was made in the height of the Cold War. This meant that the American public was constantly in fear from another war from breaking out. This made film noir movies popular, as the people watching them could easily relate to these movies, as they are mostly depressing and end in tragedy. Blade Runner was released in the early 80s, which meant it could have a higher budget than old movies such as Laura, which made the quality of the movie better and also let them have more detail throughout the movie. Laura was released in 1944, towards the end of World War II. This was when public was in fear of what was going to happen. These movies were popular because they had the same vibes as the people watching them, mainly dark and twisted movies that very rarely show any happiness or relief. The year it was made impacted how the movie was made. This is because they couldn't shoot in a lot of places, and the studios at the time were not that big. They also had fairly small budgets. There is not much music or sound in the movie, apart from classic jazz that can be heard throughout the movie. Old film noir movies featured the same sort of music throughout all of them. This is because most film noir movies back then had the same themes and settings. They're usually detective mystery / thrillers. There are very few sound effects throughout the film. These are mostly ambient sounds and not sounds the characters themselves make. However, in Blade Runner, themes of music include slow-flowing electronic jazzy music, which fits well with... There are loads of sound effects throughout this movie, mainly futuristic sounds made from objects and things surrounding the main character.